Hello, Tim Wilmot here, and welcome to my watercolor tutorial, watercolor demonstration, this time based on a subscriber suggestion. So I do welcome from time to time subscribers sending me their personal photos of different destinations for a painting demonstration. And I think those who have followed and seen a lot of my previous demonstrations, you can see the sorts of scenes that I go for, that I like. So this one is a photo kindly sent to me by a subscriber, Luciano, who I think is from Italy. So thank you very much, Luciano. And for anyone else who has recently sent me photos, don't despair if you think I haven't selected or don't think anything of your photos. Everyone that sent me photos, they're really good photographs, and I quite likely will go back to them. So don't be disappointed if you haven't heard from me or it hasn't featured recently in a watercolor demo, in a watercolor video. So why this scene? Well, I do like to paint boats, so this one's got lots of boats in a line. I like the ruins here. They're quite dominant in this photograph, so I think I'm going to have to make them a little bit smaller. My preference is to make them a little bit smaller to scale. The sun is coming from the right, so we've got lots of strong Mediterranean sunshine, so we've got lots of differences of values here. The very dark shadows within the ruins and quite light on this right hand side where the sun is catching. There's no figures in the painting, so I'm going to have to add in one or two figures amongst the boats. Just to add a little bit more interest. The boat on the left hand side here, the largest boat of the group, I'm going to make more of a feature of that, so perhaps bring that slightly in to the right hand side. I'm going to simplify some of these boats, so just rearrange them slightly. But be true to these old boats. I'm not going to change the boats, but just sort of rearrange their sequence a little bit. Nice rocks and boulders, again introducing a few dark shadows, which is always quite a nice thing with watercolor, to have those difference of tonal values, the light and the dark, the contrast there. The background, yeah, if you look at it, the more you look at it, you can spot houses, of course, maybe some roads, a distant coastal sea town there. This scene is Pizzo Calabria in southern Italy. Hopefully I've pronounced Pizzo Calabria correctly. Apologies if I haven't. But there's a lovely bay here. We can see just see the sea above these boulders. It's so insignificant. I'll have to just dispense with that. Just have a very simple background there. So a nice scene. As I say, I do like boats. The size, the dimensions of the photograph as well lends itself to the size I generally paint in, which is quarter imperial, which is in inches, 15 inches across by 11 inches. So this sort of slots in quite well to those dimensions that I paint in. Okay, so let's see how I get on. So the paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford cold press, or NOT, which is the medium texture paper, and I'm using a 3B pencil, so quite soft. So getting in just the basic outlines of the shapes, starting with the background horizon and those ruins, and now the cabin of the larger boat, the larger fishing boat, which I'm just moving in slightly to the right, so I have to kind of use my imagination on what the back end is going to look like. And now a smaller craft in front of that. Might need just to make that bow just a little bit longer from the cabin, and then the stern, so we just have that on the very left hand side, the stern of that the larger fishing boat. I think the back needs to be fairly vertical, and then the front of that cabin sort of leans in to the right. Now another fishing boat in the background there. Another smaller one on the right hand side to the front of that. And then just an indication of where the shadows are going to be. So these ruins, I'm going to add a bit more strength in the outline drawing to these. Tops of the hills in the background. And the nice thing about these ruins is you don't need to be particularly clever at drawing. Don't need to observe really straight lines. I've just sort of done a bit of cross hatching there to indicate where the darker areas are going to be. So a couple of figures, starting with the head, and thinking about the scale also of these figures. So we've got, we're lucky enough to have the boats there to measure them against, to scale them up against. So I'm not making them too small or too big. And have that second one at a slightly different angle. Yeah, just have that front of the fishing boat a little bit longer than I first did it. Something in the front there just to balance things out. Could be a bit of rope, something belonging to a boat. Just need something there in the foreground, so it's not too bland. So on to the painting and the first wash. Now the palette I've got here is my standard palette. From the top I've got neutral tint, then coming down I've got burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, sort of in the middle, which I'm using there, and I'll be using a little bit of cobalt blue, which is the next one down, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, a bright red, which is Windsor red, then a light red, cadmium orange, and a lemon yellow. So just as I say, add a little bit of cobalt blue here just to make the sky a little bit stronger, particularly in that top left corner. So I've got the light coming from the right hand side, so I want to try and make the sky a little bit lighter on the right hand side, but more intense, darker on the left. The mixing wells that I've really got sort of three main areas there. The darker one at the top, in the middle I've got the cools, generally blues and cools, and then the bottom right hand one is for warmer tones, warmer washes. So now for the base of the ruins, the base wash of the ruins, and I'm doing this while the sky is still damp, so there's going to be a bit of a soft edge appearing here, and with the sky I went over the outline of the ruins rather than go up against it, go over the ruins, and then with a slightly thicker consistency of paint here, while the sky is still damp, I'm going in with those ruins and I will get a little bit of a soft edge. You can just see it gradually merging into each other. Now for these rocks and boulders, the brush I'm using is a Raphael mop brush. It's synthetic hairs. It's got a very good edge to it, which I like, and also a very nice point, certainly when they're new. They will, as with most mop brushes, after a while you do lose that point, but you can still get quite a good edge to it. And then over to the right hand side, I've left little bits of paper showing just to indicate maybe a little bit of light catching those boulders at lighter areas, and I've painted around the figures. Not sure at the moment whether to have those lightly clothed or with dark clothes. Probably light, seeing as it's this part of the world, and they may have some sort of lighter, brighter clothing on. So that's the boulders done in the back, and you see those ruins there on the right hand side. It's gone well and truly into the sky, given a nice soft edge, which in the photograph, the values between the ruins and the sky are very similar, certainly on the right hand side, or maybe the sky is just a little bit darker perhaps in the photograph. So now for the sandy beach area here. So I've gone with, it's predominantly yellow ochre as the base for this, but I need to add other colours to it just to make it a little bit more realistic. I think if it was all one colour, it just wouldn't pull off. I'm also rubbing out or lifting out some of the paint in the ruins there, just to make that a little bit brighter. So gradually coming down the page, coming down the paper, and there's a slight slope to the paper as well, maybe about 15 degrees or so, not too steep. It does allow the paint or the wash just to travel a little bit down. So as I'm coming towards the foreground, I'm thickening up on the paint. I've got some kind of object there towards the bottom right corner. Not sure exactly what that's going to be, but I just think it needs something there in the foreground to balance up the cabin of the boat on the left, and then the ruins and the two figures, just almost like a triangle in a way. Just thinking about the composition, and just having something there in the foreground that your eye maybe hits first, and then you'd lead up to the figures, then the ruins, then over to the cabin. Now, as the beach wash is drying, it's still damp, still quite moist. I'm just dabbing in a bit more paint into that, just to let it bleed a little bit. It just gives you, with watercolor, just gives you some interesting effects, random effects appearing. And as with most things, not to overdo it either. So as the paint is drying, I'm going to do a little bit of splattering in a controlled way. So with my mop brush, with clear water, I've just splattered it, flicking it from left to right, sort of on the gradient of the beach, just to again introduce some different textures in that bigger area. With almost half the area of the painting is that beach, so I do need to have different colors, different values and textures in there, just to add a little bit more interest. And they could be with those little blossoms appearing. They could be pebbles or a drier area of the sand, perhaps. Just gives us extra opportunities, extra options on maybe introducing a little bit of shadow behind them to make them into a boulder or something like that. So now I'm drying, and I've muted the hairdryer. I'm now drying everything, making sure everything is 100% dry before going on to the next stage. I could have been patient and just let it dry on its own, which is sometimes a good idea, particularly if you've got that gradient and the paint is still moving around, just doing watercolor, doing its natural thing. So next step is the background, which in the first stage, the first wash I did, I sort of left alone. I could have, like the ruins, I could have gone in with the background and given that soft edge to it on the ridge of the mountains coming up from the bay. But it's dry now, so I'm going to have a slightly sharp edge to it, which doesn't really matter. Now it's going to be a bluey mix, just to emphasize the fact that these are distant mountains. And as I go over, I will leave just little areas unpainted to indicate some buildings, far buildings. Paint around the cabin of the fishing boat, maybe little bits and pieces on top of the cabin as well, perhaps radar or navigational stuff. And over to meet the left-hand side of the ruins. Don't need to worry about a straight horizontal line for the tops of the mountains either. Quite rough. Down to tops of the boulders. And then right hand side, which actually I think is a little bit closer to us, so I'm going a bit darker here. Notice I'm using again a mop brush, slightly smaller than the first mop brush I had, but utilizing the sharp edge that I've got, and it's a medium amount of paint within the mop brush. These mop brushes, they hold a lot of paint. You can cover a big area in one go. Go back into the wash, dabbing in that same darker color. It would just, if you look closely at the photograph, there's some darker trees or darker areas just with very soft edges around them, so I don't need too hard an edge. So adding in again, like I did with the beach, adding in a few textural differences there. Now there's some grass on the left hand side of the ruins, some tufts of grass in the middle of the ruins, and then over to the right hand side there's a grassy area. So just gone in with a bit of yellow ochre and a blue to make that green. I very rarely would use green watercolor. I would prefer to make it myself with literally any blue, any yellow, doesn't matter, and then with different ratios, different combinations between the two, you get these very light yellowy greens or very dark bluey cool greens. So now down to the cabin of the fishing boat and the hull, which has got a sort of weathered light red bottom half to the hull, probably in bad need of some paint work, so a bit of red there. And continuing on to the bow, I'm using my fingers just to smudge things a little bit. The actual top right corner of the bow is slightly darker where it's where there's a sort of natural curve of the very front of the boat, the front edge, where it's just not catching the light so much as the side. Now, with the shadows, bit of neutral tint. Everything is still wet. It's bleeding. The neutral tint is going against gravity. It's sort of seeping up into the red, giving us a nice sort of blend of the two. Continuing on with the front smaller boat. So I'm using the edge of my mop brush here to, like the first boat, a bit of a sort of weathered look to it. Nothing is too pretty and and precise, and then with the smaller mop brush, sometimes if I'm going to be painting lots of shady areas, shade under boats, shade under cars, I might keep one mop brush loaded up with dark paint, and I keep going back to that same brush, and then have another brush for doing the tops of the boats or the tops of the cars, just so I'm not constantly using my water pot and washing things out and then loading it with different colours. So having two brushes on the go, sort of pre-loaded with the light paint and the darker, thicker shadow mix. So the boat that the two figures are behind, again, a little bit of red. That lower half of the hull is red, and in with a neutral tint. Not too precise, and there's a slight gradient in this beach, not too much, so going up slightly from left to right, of course. Boat number 4, smaller one on the right. And then immediately, as soon as I can, after putting in the wash, go in with those shadows again, or just a little bit in the front, where the bow is casting a bit of a shadow to the front of the boat, but mainly it's, with the light coming from the right, mainly the shadows are going over to the left. And then a bit of shadow at the top of that cabin. So now with the figures, starting with their faces as I normally do, a sort of mixture of, to get the flesh colour, mixture of the bright red I've got and a bit of light red. So faces, then maybe a few arms appearing, and their clothing, thinking of where the light's coming from. So brighter on the right hand side, a little bit darker on the left hand side. And the nice thing about having these figures behind the boat is I just need to think about the top half of them. Don't need to worry about the legs at all, which sometimes can be the tricky thing for people attempting. You can do the torso okay, but then things go horribly wrong with the legs. Now, the ruins. So I just check with my fingers just to make sure everything's dryish, and with something quite dark now, adding a bit of shadows. So we're trying to now make this a little bit more three-dimensional with the darker values. And this is probably going to be one of the darker areas of the painting, which is sometimes what I look for in a painting is when I look in a photograph to check that it's suitable for, how easy can I use that photograph for a watercolor painting, and has it got dark areas? Has it got light areas? How close is the dark area to the light area? Which is the darkest area? Which is the lightest area in that photograph? So there's something going across the middle of the ruins. We've got the ground level and the first floor. Perhaps someone watching this video can let me know, if you're local or Luciano, if you know what that ruin is called. So with the brush now, it's not too wet, it's quite dry. We can add in a few dry brush strokes, and then this object, whatever it is, doesn't really matter, in the foreground there. And there are some ropes, thin ropes, or fairly thin ropes, going right across the scene, sort of replicating the row of the boats. Again, there's lots of horizontals in this composition. A lot of repetition of horizontals. The tops of the mountain, the tops of the boulders, the row of boats, the markings on the boats as well, which I'll come to shortly, and then the ropes that are tethering everything down. So it's nice, that sort of repetition, I think, worked quite well with the composition, sort of going from the top down to the bottom. So adding to these horizontals, tops of the bows now, I've got these lovely dark blue, mainly blue lines. Just add those in very roughly. I don't need to be too precise because these boats have seen a lot of action. Might be bits of paint missing, and the paint's been faded in the sunshine as well. Now I need to be fairly careful with the curve on the main boat there. This markings on the main boat. And the windows and the cabins. Not just rectangles or squares, but if you look at the front window, it's dark at the top and light at the bottom. So with another dry brush stroke, drawing in the markings on the front boat, which doesn't actually go all the way to the bow on that one. So I've got a smaller synthetic brush here. The mop brushes I was using were from a company called Raphael, and this one is an Escoda brush. So they're all reasonably well known, good makes of brushes. As I say, this one's synthetic, a sort of smallish brush, good for details. So just adding in little bits of paint, little marks here and there. To add to the texture of things. The boulders the boulders just below the ruins, they do have little bits of shadows here and there. Now we do need some masts or radio aerials for the cabin. Just add those in there. A few more verticals. These horizontals can't have it all their own way. Got to have a balance of a few verticals. Just add a bit of a line there, definition to the front boat. And the areas I left on the beach, the lighter areas, some of those splatter marks, I'm now adding in, thinking where the light's coming from, adding in a bit of shadow on the left hand side, below and to the left. Maybe some kind of a seat there or a few planks in that boat. There aren't any in the photograph, but I just think it just needs it a little bit. Now the cabin, adding a line across the top just to make it look as if there's a bit of a lip to the cover of the cabin, casting a bit of shadow below, very lightical still on the top there, one of the lightest areas. There's this sort of reel, or looks like some sort of fan or object protruding out the back of that front boat, We don't really need to know what it is, but it's just another object there, which I'll keep in the painting. And then a few more ropes going along the beach. Bit more on the left hand side. A few little dabs here and there. Bits of seaweed. Some sort of debris maybe. Yeah, but just make those a little bit darker, the windows. And I think we are done. So the finished painting, thanks very much again to Luciano for sending in that lovely photograph of Pizzo Calabria. And as I say, I like painting boats, not necessarily in water. Here we've got them moored up on a beach, and we've got most things that we want in a painting. We've got background, we've got the middle, we've got the foreground. We've changed the boats around just a little bit. We've introduced a couple of figures, done in a very loose watercolor style, starting off with the background wash, letting everything dry, then going in with the darker values, and then finally the details of the boat markings, the figures, bits of shadows, ropes, and so on. So hopefully you like that painting, and you will see more of my paintings up on my website, www.timwilmot.com. So thanks very much for watching. If you'd like to send a photograph to me for consideration of a future demo video up on YouTube, I'd just ask you to observe a few things, please. First of all, it must be your own photograph. You took the photograph, you own the photograph, it doesn't belong to anyone else, you haven't sold it to anyone else. I do need to know the photograph location. That's always nice to know, just to introduce that in my commentary. Also, you must be a subscriber, so if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this watercolor channel. I do try to regularly post new paintings, new demos, tutorials up there every 2 to 4 weeks. As I say, you will see more up on my website as well. Up on Patreon at the moment, I am also offering a critique service, so if you do want to have a go at some of my demonstration videos, have a go yourself, then for a very small affordable fee, you can have me give you a detailed critique and some extra materials available to you that's not available through this demo video. So any photographs you got, please email them to me, timothywilmot@gmail.com, TIMOTHY wilmot@gmail.com. But thanks very much for watching. Thanks again to Luciano, and catch up with you on the next demo video. Thank you very much.